Imagine the dense fog rolling in, swallowing the dim glow of gas lamps lining the streets of Victorian London. The air is damp, heavy with the stench of coal smoke and unwashed bodies, a city teeming with life yet cloaked in shadows. Whitechapel, a district on the city's east end, is a maze of narrow alleys and dark corners where desperation thrives. It's the autumn of 1888, and the heart of London beats to the rhythm of factory bells and hurried footsteps. But beneath this facade of industry lies a sinister undercurrent. The streets hum with whispers of fear, and the clatter of hooves on cobblestones barely masks the dread that has taken root. The newspapers call him the Whitechapel murderer. Women are found mutilated in ways too gruesome to describe. They say he strikes in the dead of night, vanishing like a phantom before the first rays of dawn. And tonight, the fog feels heavier. The city holds its breath. Somewhere out there in the shadows, he waits. Mary Ann Nichols, or Polly to those who knew her, was no stranger to hardship. A mother of 5, her life had unraveled piece by piece, failed relationships, bouts of homelessness, and the suffocating grip of poverty defined her existence. Yet there was a spark in Polly, a resilience that refused to be extinguished. On the evening of August 31st, Polly was last seen alive. She had been turned away from a lodging house, unable to afford the few pennies needed for a bed. She assured the keeper, "I'll find my dust money, don't you worry," before disappearing into the fog-drenched streets of Whitechapel. Her body was discovered mere hours later. She was lying on the cold cobblestones of Bucks Row, her throat slashed with chilling precision. But it wasn't just the act of killing, it was the brutality, the grotesque mutilation that followed that left the investigators and the community horrified. This was no ordinary crime. Polly wasn't just a victim, she was the first, the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt Whitechapel for years to come. The scene at Bucks Row was one of unspeakable horror. In the dim light of an early morning lantern, the lifeless body of Mary Ann Nichols was discovered sprawled on the damp cobblestones. Her skirts were hiked up, a gruesome sight that sent a chill through the men who found her. Her throat had been savagely cut twice, with such force that the blade nearly severed her head. But it was the deeper horror that awaited investigators. Her abdomen had been slashed open, the mutilations precise yet unnervingly chaotic, as if the killer had acted with both purpose and frenzy. Polly's eyes were fixed in a lifeless stare, her body still warm when discovered. The killer had worked quickly and silently, disappearing into the fog before anyone heard a sound. The authorities initially thought it might be a robbery gone wrong or the work of a lunatic prowling the streets, but something about the savagery suggested this was no random act. This was calculated. The eerie precision of the cuts whispered a chilling truth. This was only the beginning. And as the news of Polly's murder spread, so did the fear, weaving its way into the fabric of Whitechapel. A predator had claimed his first victim, and no one could predict when he would strike again. The Metropolitan Police arrived at Bucks Row with little more than the faint glow of gas lamps to illuminate the grim scene. Superintendent Thomas Arnold and Inspector Frederick Aberline, both seasoned officers, were called in to spearhead the investigation. Their task was daunting: find a killer who seemed to vanish into the night like a ghost. Polly Nichols's murder offered few tangible clues. No weapon was found. No witnesses had come forward claiming to have seen or heard anything suspicious. The slums of Whitechapel were a labyrinth of twisting alleys and shadowy corners perfect for someone who knew how to disappear. The officers turned their attention to Polly's final hours, retracing her steps from the lodging house to the grim spot where her life had ended. Witnesses recalled her stumbling through the streets, slightly drunk, but nothing about her behavior hinted at the terror that awaited her. Autopsy results deepened the mystery. The nature of the wounds suggested the killer had a disturbing level of anatomical knowledge. Some speculated he could be a butcher, a doctor, or even a surgeon. But this was only a theory, and without more evidence, it was impossible to narrow down. Whitechapel's streets were alive with whispers. Was this the work of a lone madman or something more sinister? The police were under immense pressure to find answers, but with little to go on, their investigation stumbled into the shadows. And as they struggled to piece together Polly's final moments, the predator in the fog was already preparing for his next victim. The murder of Mary Ann Nichols sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community of Whitechapel. The streets, already a place of poverty and struggle, now carried an air of palpable dread. Women, especially those who walked alone at night, began to glance over their shoulders, clutching their shawls tighter against the cold. The sense of safety, fragile as it had always been, was shattered. Whispers spread like wildfire. In taverns, lodging houses, and market stalls, one question lingered on every lip: who would do such a thing? The brutality of the crime suggested something far beyond a robbery or a random act of violence. Fear morphed into speculation, and speculation into paranoia. Every shadowy figure, every stranger, became a potential killer in the minds of the locals. Some believed the murderer was a deranged lunatic prowling the streets, driven by an insatiable bloodlust. Others whispered darker theories. This was no ordinary man, but something more sinister, more calculated. Rumors even swirled of a foreign menace, stoking tensions in an already volatile district filled with immigrants and social unrest. The local press fueled the hysteria, publishing sensational headlines that only deepened the terror. The nickname Leather Apron emerged, referencing a figure some claimed to have seen lurking in the area. The fear was intoxicating, gripping the people of Whitechapel and spreading far beyond its narrow alleys. But amidst the panic, one thing was certain: the killer was still out there, and as the community held its breath, wondering who would be next, they couldn't know how soon their fears would be realized. The murder of Mary Ann Nichols was only the beginning. Just over a week later, on September 8th, the body of Annie Chapman was discovered in the backyard of a lodging house on Hanbury Street. The gruesome nature of her death sent shockwaves even through those who had grown numb to violence in Whitechapel. Like Polly, her throat had been brutally slashed and her body mutilated with chilling precision. But this time, the killer had gone further. Organs were missing. The police began to see a horrifying pattern emerge. Both victims were women of similar backgrounds, struggling to survive in the harsh streets of Whitechapel. Both were attacked in the early hours of the morning in secluded locations, and the violence inflicted on them suggested not just a desire to kill, but a need to destroy. By the end of September, the body count grew. On September 30th, two women were murdered on the same night in what would later be known as the double event. Elizabeth Stride's body was found first, her throat cut, but without the same extensive mutilations seen in previous victims. Some speculated the killer had been interrupted. Less than an hour later, Catherine Eddowes was discovered in Mitre Square, her body bearing the full brutality of the Ripper's work, her face disfigured, her abdomen savaged, and organs removed with disturbing precision. The connection between the crimes was undeniable. The killer's signature throat cuts, mutilations, and the methodical removal of organs suggested someone who operated with both control and madness. Investigators were certain they were dealing with a single individual, a predator who was growing bolder with each attack. Yet, despite the emerging pattern, the motive remained a chilling enigma. Was this someone driven by a twisted desire for power, a lust for blood, or something even more sinister? The only certainty was this: Jack the Ripper was not finished, and Whitechapel was now caught in the grip of terror unlike anything it had ever known. Witnesses came forward, but their accounts were as murky as the fog that cloaked Whitechapel. Conflicting stories painted a fragmented picture, adding to the confusion and frustration of the police. In the case of Annie Chapman, a man named John Richardson claimed to have been in the backyard of the lodging house mere minutes before her body was discovered. He said he saw nothing unusual, no sounds of a struggle, no sign of the horror about to unfold. Yet another witness, Elizabeth Long, stated she saw Annie speaking with a man just moments before her murder. She described him as shabby genteel, wearing a dark coat and deerstalker hat. Was he the killer, or merely another shadow in Waitekapel's crowded streets? The double event on September 30th offered even more conflicting testimonies. Several people reported seeing Elizabeth stride with a man shortly before her death. Some described him as well-dressed, others as rough and disheveled. A witness named Israel Schwartz claimed he saw a man assaulting Stride, but fled when the suspect turned toward him, shouting a command in what he believed to be a foreign language. Was this Jack the Ripper or someone entirely unrelated? In the case of Catherine Eddowes, police interviewed a night watchman who reported seeing a man with a woman matching Eddowes' description near Mitre Square. He described the man as being of medium height with a mustache and a peaked cap. The description was vague, the details too common in Waitekapel's diverse population to narrow the search. The lack of consistency was maddening. Each witness seemed to offer a different version of events, their memories clouded by fear, darkness, or perhaps even embellishment. The one constant was this: the killer moved swiftly and silently, leaving no clear trail. The conflicting accounts deepened the mystery. Who was this man seen in the shadows? Could multiple witnesses have glimpsed the same person, or were their minds fabricating a killer from the depths of their collective terror? The answers remained as elusive as the figure haunting Waitekapel's streets. In 1888, forensic science was in its infancy, and the tools available to investigators were crude by modern standards. Yet, the crime scenes in Waitekapel offered haunting clues that hinted at the killer's methods and state of mind. One of the most disturbing discoveries was the precision of the mutilations. Medical examiners noted that the killer had a chilling familiarity with anatomy. In the case of Annie Chapman, for instance, her uterus had been removed with what appeared to be deliberate expertise. Some speculated the killer might have medical training: a surgeon, a butcher, or someone skilled in handling knives. This theory added a chilling layer to the mystery, suggesting the killer was not only brutal but calculating. However, these observations were limited by the era's lack of advanced forensic techniques. Blood typing, fingerprinting, and DNA analysis tools we now consider essential were non-existent. Investigators were forced to rely on what could be seen with the naked eye and the accounts of overburdened doctors examining the victims in dimly lit mortuaries. One piece of evidence that stood out was a bloody piece of apron found near Galston Street after Catherine Eddowes' murder. Beside it, someone had scrawled a cryptic message on the wall: "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." The meaning of the graffiti baffled investigators. Was it a message from the killer, a taunt to the authorities, or merely a coincidental scrawl unrelated to the crime? The decision to erase the message before it could be fully analyzed remains a point of controversy, highlighting the challenges and missteps of the investigation. Despite the killer's apparent skill, he left no identifiable traces. The Victorian streets of Waitekapel, soaked in grime and shadow, made tracking footprints or other physical evidence nearly impossible. Witnesses described a sharp blade, but no murder weapon was ever recovered. And so the investigation floundered, hindered not only by the limitations of technology, but also by the chaotic nature of Waitekapel itself, a district teeming with suspects, secrets, and silence. As the bodies piled up, the authorities faced a grim reality. They were chasing a phantom, a shadow that left behind only the brutal aftermath of his work. The lack of forensic progress allowed the Ripper to remain one step ahead, and the killer's twisted artistry continued to haunt London's darkest corners. As the murders continued, the streets of Waitekapel became a powder keg of fear and suspicion. The police, under immense pressure to identify the killer, began narrowing their focus on potential suspects. Each name that surfaced added another layer to the mystery, but none came without controversy. One of the first individuals to draw attention was a man known as Leather Apron. Described as a menacing figure who extorted money from local sex workers, he became a prime suspect when whispers of his violent tendencies spread through the community. His real identity was later revealed as John Pizer, a shoemaker of Polish descent. Pizer's arrest brought temporary relief to the frightened residents, but it was short-lived. He had solid alibis for the nights of the murders, and no evidence linked him to the crimes. He was eventually released, but the shadow of suspicion lingered. Then came Montague John Drute, a barrister and part-time schoolteacher. His name entered the investigation after his mysterious death. His body was found floating in the River Thames not long after the last canonical murder. Drute's family suggested he had suffered from mental health issues, and some believed he might have been the Ripper, ending his life out of guilt. However, no direct evidence tied him to the killings, and the theory remained speculative at best. Another suspect was Aaron Kosminski, a Polish immigrant and barber who lived in Wojtekapel. Kosminski was known to suffer from paranoid delusions and reportedly harbored a deep hatred for women. Police at the time considered him a strong suspect, particularly due to his proximity to the crime scenes. Decades later, a controversial DNA analysis from a shawl purportedly belonging to Catherine Eddowes pointed to Kosminski. Yet, the evidence was far from definitive, and the case against him remains steeped in uncertainty. Others, like Michael Ostrog, a Russian-born criminal with a history of violent behavior, and Dr. Francis Tumblety, an eccentric American physician with a fascination for collecting female body parts, also fell under scrutiny. While both men fit certain aspects of the Ripper's profile, neither could be definitively placed at the scenes of the murders. Each suspect brought with them tantalizing possibilities, but also maddening dead ends. The deeper investigators dug, the more elusive the killer became, slipping through the cracks of their theories and evidence. Wojtekapel's residents were left wondering, was the killer hiding in plain sight, or had he already vanished into the mists of history? The chilling uncertainty only deepened the terror gripping London's East End. The investigation into Jack the Ripper's identity was plagued by tantalizing leads that dissolved into maddening dead ends. Each new theory seemed to promise answers, only to crumble under scrutiny, leaving investigators and the public grasping at shadows. One of the most frustrating leads involved the double event on the night of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes' murders. A man named Israel Schwartz claimed to have witnessed a violent confrontation with a man moments before Stride's body was found. He described the suspect as a stout man with a small black mustache. However, when questioned further, Schwartz's account became increasingly inconsistent, casting doubt on whether the figure he saw had anything to do with the murders. Was it the Ripper, or just a drunken argument unrelated to the crime? The trail went cold. Another potential breakthrough came with the discovery of the bloody apron near Galston Street, believed to have belonged to Catherine Eddowes. Beside it was the infamous graffiti, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Some investigators were convinced it was a clue left by the killer, a deliberate taunt to the police. Others believed it was an unrelated scrawl. Fearing the message could incite anti-Semitic violence, authorities erased it before it could be thoroughly examined. Whatever secrets it held were lost forever. Then there was the case of James Maybrick, a wealthy Liverpool cotton merchant. Decades after the murders, a diary allegedly written by Maybrick surfaced, filled with confessions of being Jack the Ripper. The diary described the murders in chilling detail, aligning with many facts of the case. For a brief moment, it seemed the mystery had been solved, but doubts quickly emerged when experts questioned the diary's authenticity. Was it a genuine confession or an elaborate hoax? The answer remains unclear, but Maybrick's name faded from serious consideration. The frustration only deepened when police pursued individuals based on flimsy evidence or public outcry. Countless men were brought in for questioning, only to be released due to lack of proof. The streets of Whitechapel were alive with rumors, each whisper muddying the waters further. Suspects with compelling profiles slipped through their fingers, and with each passing day, the Ripper seemed to grow bolder. These false leads only added to the sense of helplessness that gripped Whitechapel. The predator was still out there, a ghost who left just enough behind to haunt investigators, but not enough to catch him. Each promising theory raised hopes, only to crush them under the weight of unanswered questions. And all the while, the chilling thought lingered. He was watching, waiting, preparing to strike again. The investigation into Jack the Ripper took a dramatic turn in October of 1888, when the so-called "From Hell" letter arrived at the doorstep of George Lusk, chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. This chilling note was unlike the other letters police and newspapers had received, which were often dismissed as hoaxes. What set this one apart was the grotesque parcel it came with, a small box containing half of a human kidney preserved in alcohol. The accompanying letter, written in erratic and almost childlike handwriting, was brief but sinister. It read, "From hell, Mr. Lusk. Sir, I send you half the kidney I took from one woman. Preserved it for you. T'other piece I fried and ate it. It was very nice. Catch me when you can. Mr. Lusk." The kidney, according to some experts, matched the injuries inflicted on Catherine Eddowes, whose body had been mutilated just days before the letter was sent. Her left kidney had been removed with surgical precision, and the possibility that this organ had come from her body sent shockwaves through the investigators. If genuine, this letter was the most direct taunt yet from the killer, a chilling insight into his mind and his desire to mock the authorities. For a moment, it seemed like the case had cracked open. The letter and the kidney were analyzed with the tools of the time, but again, the limitations of Victorian forensics hindered progress. No fingerprints, no definitive proof of its origin, just more questions. Some investigators believed it was a cruel hoax, potentially from a medical student or someone seeking infamy. Others felt the macabre nature of the parcel was too specific to ignore. Was this truly a piece of the Ripper's gruesome work, or an elaborate trick to sow further chaos? The letter changed the tone of the investigation, marking a shift in how the killer was perceived. No longer seen as merely a depraved murderer, the Ripper was now viewed as a cold and calculating individual, capable of taunting those hunting him. The public grew more terrified, the police more desperate, and still the killer remained a step ahead, lurking in the shadows, ready to strike again. The "From Hell" letter became one of the most iconic artifacts of the case, symbolizing both the Ripper's sadistic arrogance and the investigators' growing frustration. It was a critical moment, a twist that deepened the mystery rather than unraveling it, leaving the police and the public to wonder just how far the Ripper would go to cement his legacy of terror. The murders of Jack the Ripper ignited a media frenzy unlike anything Whitechapel had ever seen. Newspapers were quick to sensationalize the grisly details, transforming the anonymous killer into a macabre celebrity. Headlines screamed of horrors in the East End and ghastly crimes by a maniac, feeding the public's insatiable appetite for fear and intrigue. The press wielded enormous power during the case. They gave the killer his infamous moniker, Jack the Ripper, after the "Dear Boss" letter was published, a letter believed by many to be a hoax. This name, paired with vivid descriptions of the murders, turned a faceless murderer into an almost mythic figure. The public devoured every article, each new report stoking the flames of terror and speculation. The media's coverage had a dual effect. On one hand, it galvanized public interest, ensuring that pressure on the police to solve the case was relentless, but it also created chaos. False reports and rampant rumors muddied the waters, sending investigators on wild goose chases. Theories ranged from the plausible, a doctor with anatomical knowledge, to the absurd, with some articles even speculating that the killer was a supernatural entity. The public, terrified yet morbidly fascinated, became deeply involved. Ordinary citizens formed groups like the White-Capel Vigilance Committee to patrol the streets, frustrated with the police's inability to capture the killer. These groups often clashed with law enforcement, further complicating the already strained investigation. Meanwhile, the press fueled divisions within the city. Some newspapers targeted immigrant communities, blaming the murders on foreigners and stoking xenophobia in an already volatile district. Others criticized the police force, accusing them of incompetence and corruption. Every failure, every new victim became a headline, a symbol of law enforcement's inability to protect the vulnerable. The killer's notoriety reached far beyond White-Capel, turning the Ripper into a global sensation. Stories circulated in Europe and America, drawing worldwide attention to the grim streets of London. But with this attention came a darker realization. The Ripper wasn't just killing women, he was dismantling the public's trust in their institutions, exploiting the fear and chaos to maintain his invisibility. The media's relentless coverage, while instrumental in keeping the case alive, also amplified its confusion. In the end, the press turned the Ripper into a legend, one that still haunts the world long after the gaslights of White-Capel went dark. The nature of Jack the Ripper's crimes painted a chilling portrait of a mind consumed by rage and precision. Experts at the time, and even modern criminal psychologists, have tried to decipher what drove this shadowy figure to commit such heinous acts. The sheer brutality of the murders, coupled with the calculated mutilations, suggested the killer was not merely acting on impulse. This was someone who planned meticulously and took perverse pleasure in their work. The choice of victims provided a grim insight into the killer's psyche. Each victim was a vulnerable woman, likely a sex worker, navigating the dangerous streets of White-Capel. The Ripper appeared to target them, not just for their accessibility, but as a way to exert power over those society already marginalized. The level of violence, slashed throats, precise mutilations, and organ removal hinted at a deep-seated hatred, possibly aimed at women or a specific group he associated them with. Psychologists have theorized that the Ripper may have been someone socially isolated, perhaps experiencing delusions or harboring severe psychological trauma. The precision of the mutilations suggested a knowledge of anatomy, fueling speculation that the killer could have been a doctor, butcher, or someone with surgical training. Yet, the chaotic frenzy of the attacks hinted at a mind spiraling into darkness, a blend of calculated planning and uncontrollable rage. Perhaps the most terrifying aspect was the killer's ability to blend into the everyday bustle of White-Capel. The Ripper seemed to thrive on the chaos he created, using the fog and shadows as his accomplices. His methodical approach, coupled with his taunting letters, suggested someone who craved control and recognition. He wanted to be feared, to command the headlines and the public's attention, a psychological profile that places him among history's most notorious killers. Despite the widespread terror and the massive resources poured into the investigation, Jack the Ripper was never brought to justice. There was no trial, no moment of closure for the families of the victims or the community of White-Capel. This lack of resolution became a festering wound for the authorities, exposing the limitations of Victorian-era policing. The police force faced immense pressure from both the public and the press. Public meetings turned into angry mobs, demanding action and accusing the police of incompetence. The frustration extended to White-Capel's residents, who felt abandoned by the very institutions meant to protect them. The investigative efforts were exhaustive but fragmented. Over 2,000 interviews were conducted and countless suspects were interrogated. Still, none of this led to a conviction. The police issued public notices urging residents to be vigilant, but these measures offered little reassurance. The murders seemed random yet precise, leaving the authorities chasing shadows. For the victims' families, the lack of justice was devastating. Women like Mary Ann Nichols and Annie Chapman were already struggling in the harshest conditions, and their murders erased any small comfort they might have offered their loved ones. Their names were reduced to headlines, their lives overshadowed by the grim spectacle of their deaths. By the close of 1888, the murders abruptly stopped, leaving the authorities in a state of unresolved tension. Did the killer die, flee, or simply stop? Without a trial or any definitive answers, Jack the Ripper remained a phantom, a grim reminder of how easily justice can slip through society's grasp. In the end, the absence of legal closure cemented Jack the Ripper's legend, turning him from a criminal into a ghostly figure of folklore. The streets of Waitekapel may have quieted, but the unanswered questions continue to echo, leaving behind an enduring sense of unease. The mystery of Jack the Ripper has spawned a web of conspiracies and theories that have captivated the public imagination for over a century. As investigators failed to pin down the killer, speculation took root, and each theory seemed more intriguing and controversial than the last. One of the most enduring theories involved the possibility of a royal connection. Some suggested that Prince Albert Victor, the grandson of Queen Victoria, was the Ripper. According to this theory, the prince had fathered a child with a working-class woman in Waitekapel, and the murders were orchestrated to cover up the scandal. While the notion of a royal involved in such grisly crimes was tantalizing, historians have debunked it as lacking credible evidence. Another chilling theory implicated Freemasonry. Proponents argued that the killings were ritualistic in nature and carried out by a group of Freemasons attempting to silence individuals who knew too much about their secrets. The cryptic message found near Galston Street, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing," was cited as evidence of Masonic symbolism. However, this interpretation has been widely dismissed by experts who see it as a product of conspiracy-minded thinking. A more grounded theory focused on Dr. Francis Tumblety, an eccentric American doctor who was in London at the time of the murders. Known for his misogynistic views and fascination with collecting human organs, Tumblety was briefly arrested on unrelated charges before fleeing back to the United States. His departure coincided with the end of the murders, fueling speculation that he might have been the killer. Yet, a lack of concrete evidence left this theory unresolved. One of the most controversial theories emerged decades later, pointing to Aaron Kosminski, a Polish barber and one of the original suspects. In the 21st century, DNA analysis of a shawl allegedly found at the scene of Catherine Eddowes' murder suggested Kosminski's involvement. However, this evidence has been hotly debated, with many experts questioning the chain of custody and the reliability of the testing methods. Then there was the idea that Jack the Ripper was not a man at all, but a woman. Dubbed Jill the Ripper, this theory proposed that a midwife or a female abortionist might have carried out the killings. Proponents argued that a woman would have been less likely to arouse suspicion while moving through Waitekapel's streets at night. However, this theory remains largely speculative, with little supporting evidence. As time went on, these theories only deepened the mystique surrounding the case. Some were born of genuine attempts to solve the mystery, others of sensationalism and the public's need to make sense of the incomprehensible. What they all share is the allure of the unknown, the irresistible pull of a case that defies resolution. Each theory, no matter how implausible, added another layer to the legend of Jack the Ripper. The truth, it seemed, remained buried beneath the fog of Victorian London, waiting to be uncovered, or perhaps destined to remain forever out of reach. By the end of 1888, the streets of Waitekapel grew eerily quiet. After the brutal murder of Mary Jane Kelly in November, the most gruesome and final canonical killing, Jack the Ripper, seemed to vanish. The lack of new victims offered temporary relief, but for investigators, the silence was deafening. the killer's disappearance only deepened the enigma, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and shattered lives. The police, despite their initial vigor, found their efforts grinding to a halt. Over the course of the investigation, they had conducted thousands of interviews, followed countless leads, and interrogated dozens of suspects. But no arrests were made, and no one was brought to trial. The sheer scope of the investigation overwhelmed the force, and as time passed, public pressure shifted to other matters. White-Capel's poverty and crime persisted, and the murders, though unforgettable, became another grim chapter in its history. For the families of the victims, the lack of resolution was unbearable. The women whose lives had been brutally taken, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, were mourned, but their stories were overshadowed by the legend of their killer. They became part of a macabre narrative, their personal tragedies reduced to headlines and theories. Investigators like Inspector Frederick Aberline, who had dedicated months to the case, expressed their frustration and regret. The lack of advanced forensic methods, combined with the chaos of White-Capel, made the investigation feel like chasing a phantom. And so, the case was gradually shelved, consigned to the annals of unsolved mysteries. The Ripper case never truly faded into obscurity. Over the years, advances in technology and fresh perspectives have reignited interest, drawing both professional investigators and amateur sleuths into its shadowy depths. In the late 20th century, criminal profiling emerged as a new tool for understanding the Ripper's psyche. Experts suggested that the killer was likely a male in his late 20s or early 30s with knowledge of anatomy and an intimate familiarity with White-Capel's streets. These insights painted a clearer picture of the perpetrator but offered no concrete answers. In the 21st century, forensic science brought new hope. DNA analysis was performed on a shawl allegedly found near Catherine Eddowes' body. The results suggested a match with the descendants of Aaron Kosminski, one of the original suspects. This discovery was hailed as a breakthrough by some, but was met with skepticism by others. Critics pointed to the questionable provenance of the shawl and the potential for contamination over the decades. The debate over Kosminski's guilt remains unresolved. Digital archives and modern investigative techniques have also allowed researchers to revisit old evidence and theories. Geographic profiling has been used to map the killer's movements, suggesting he likely lived near the crime scenes. But these modern tools, while illuminating, have yet to uncover the definitive truth. Each reassessment of the case brings with it the hope of closure, yet the mystery endures. Jack the Ripper remains an enigma, his identity as elusive now as it was over a century ago. The case of Jack the Ripper continues to haunt the collective imagination, not just for its brutality, but for the questions it leaves unanswered. Who was the killer? Was he one of the named suspects, or did he escape unnoticed, blending seamlessly into the chaos of White-Capel? Why did he choose those particular victims, and what drove him to commit such calculated savagery? The Ripper's abrupt disappearance is perhaps the most perplexing question of all. Did he die, flee, or simply stop? If so, why? Without new evidence, these questions remain speculative, tantalizing threads that refuse to tie into a complete picture. The case's enduring legacy lies in the fragments it left behind: the haunting letters, the gruesome crime scenes, the whispers of fear that echoed through White-Capel. These remnants have been analyzed, debated, and reinterpreted countless times, yet they resist resolution. Every theory adds another layer to the story, but none can fully explain the horror of those autumn nights in 1888. The allure of the mystery is timeless. Jack the Ripper represents the ultimate challenge, a puzzle with missing pieces, a story with no ending. For investigators, historians, and storytellers alike, the Ripper is more than a criminal, he is a ghost, a symbol of the unknown that continues to captivate and terrify us. And so, the fog of White remains unbroken, shrouding the truth in shadows that may never fully lift. The questions linger, unanswered and haunting. Who was Jack the Ripper? And why did he disappear into the night, leaving behind only terror and silence? The case of Jack the Ripper left an indelible mark on society, reshaping how crime was understood and addressed. For the people of White, the murders exposed the grim realities of poverty, crime, and neglect that plagued their community. The horrific nature of the killings forced Victorian society to confront the vulnerabilities of its underprivileged, sparking debates about social reform and the need for better living conditions. On a broader scale, the Ripper case highlighted the limitations of 19th century policing. The inability to solve such a high-profile case led to significant changes in law enforcement practices. Investigative methods grew more systematic, with greater emphasis on preserving crime scenes, interviewing witnesses, and cataloging evidence. The case even played a role in advancing the use of criminal profiling and forensic science, as detectives sought to understand the mind behind the crimes. Culturally, Jack the Ripper became a dark icon, immortalized in literature, film, and media. His story has been retold countless times, each iteration reflecting society's enduring fascination with the macabre. Yet, the Ripper is more than just a character in a chilling tale. He represents the fear of the unknown, the idea that evil can hide in plain sight, and the vulnerability of those who fall through the cracks of society. The murders also changed how the public viewed crime reporting. Sensationalist journalism became a powerful force, shaping public opinion and intensifying fear. The case demonstrated the media's ability to elevate a criminal to near mythic status, a phenomenon that persists in today's coverage of notorious crimes. Over a century later, Jack the Ripper's impact lingers. His legacy is one of terror, mystery, and an unsettling reminder of the thin line between order and chaos. Jack the Ripper remains one of history's most chilling enigmas. Despite countless theories, suspects, and investigations, his true identity has eluded capture. Was he Aaron Kosminski, Montague John Druitt, or Dr. Francis Tumblety? Or was he someone whose name history never recorded? Why did he stop? What drove him to commit such gruesome acts? The questions remain as haunting as the crimes themselves. This case is not just a story of murder, it's a story of fear, desperation, and the pursuit of truth in the face of the unknowable. The lack of resolution has turned Jack the Ripper into a symbol, a ghostly figure who lingers in the shadows of history, reminding us of the fragility of justice and the enduring power of mystery. Now it's your turn to weigh in. Who do you think Jack the Ripper was? What theory makes the most sense to you, or do you believe the truth lies somewhere we've yet to uncover? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Crime Pulse Stories for more gripping tales of mystery and intrigue. Together, we'll continue to explore the darkest corners of history, uncovering the stories that still haunt us to this day. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.